Hello everyone, welcome back to my communications vlog. Today I'm going to be discussing the week 10 reading, and I'm going to start with the reading pop culture reading. The reading pop culture reading this week was Chapter 6, Movies, Does the Big Screen Still Shape Our Dreams? The first article I want to discuss was The Imagination of Disaster by Susan Sontag, and this article was all about sci-fi, how sci-fi and fantasy films both beautify what is real in the world, as well as neutralizing what we see about the real world. And recently, she made the point that sci-fi films have become the modern westerns in the sense that their plots are so predictable. Science fiction is not about science, it's about fantastical disaster. I thought that was a really interesting point that she made. Science fiction turns basically human destruction into something beautiful, which is what makes them so entertaining to us. The awakening of some huge beast in science, as so often happens in science fiction, is often a metaphor for nuclear weapons as well. There's this overarching theme of humans shouldn't have messed with things that they didn't understand. You find that a lot in the genre of sci-fi. And science fiction is often generally a look into the disaster that humans can inflict on themselves. Specifically, sci-fi and monster movies in Japan are really a metaphor for the fear of atomic weapons, Japanese nuclear paranoia, and since that makes sense because they're the only that has had the bomb dropped on them. But that's that nuclear paranoia gave rise to one of the most popular monsters of all time, Godzilla. So it's an interesting look at sci-fi. The next article was Hollywood's Love Affair with Surveillance by Willie Osterwell. And this was all about how the theme of government surveillance has been infecting Hollywood, especially recently with so many governments, including our own, being exposed to be spying on their people using wiretapping and other methods. This theme has really infected Hollywood, and we're often shown what total government surveillance, like complete 100% surveillance by the government on its people, would look like in movies. And some examples of this would be the recent RoboCop movie in 2014, which showed like an all-powerful police force that could watch the city watch any part of the city at any time, 24 hours a day, and therefore stop crime easier. Captain America: The Winter Soldier was also an example, and then in literature, in literature, an example of this would be George Orwell's famous dystopian novel, 1984. I found that really interesting. The next article was Has Hollywood Murdered the Movies by David Benby. And this is all about how modern movies have become entirely too focused on spectacle, and they're filled with modern movies are filled, for the most part, with too much digitized explosions and action. Movies such as The Avengers will cause a massive media storm when they're first released, and they'll make a ton of money, but then soon will fade from memory without leaving behind any real impact or real significance. And this problem may stem from the desire to make as much money as possible with every movie that's released nowadays, these big budget blockbusters. Movie producers, screenwriters, and directors wonder what will put the most butts in seats when they're making a movie, and so this results in kind of cheap movies that feel cheap and too much action and just too bloated. There's not really any significance behind them. Big budget movies will also be paired with like other forms with marketing schemes such as like fast food items and toys and they will infect the media in that way to try to sell the movie even more and also to appeal to kids. Basically, the article made the point that overloaded action has taken over movies, replacing real emotion and engagement. Smaller and more serious films with independent directors often have trouble getting made because there's fears that they won't make enough money. And for smaller directors, it's hard to make the movie you want without the money you need, without the right amount of money, because movies are expensive. You have to get the camera crews and pay the actors. And anyway, Benby makes the point that there's been a huge shift in movie scale production, and movies are now aimed at kids rather than adults, a larger and easier to please demographic, and this is what he believes has ruined the movies. I actually kind of disagree with him on that. I mean, there's still Oscar movies getting made, like Moonlight and La La Land, and these are still huge budget movies, and they still win Oscars, and they're still very good. But there's also huge action movies. And to say that The Avengers is a shallow movie, it's really not. I mean, if this guy David Benby may not be a comic book fan, but for comic book fans, it's the culmination of 70 years of work to get this movie made. ever since the Avengers comics first started coming out in, the 50s and 60s. It's like it took this long to get the movie made, and it was a great adaptation. And for someone to dismiss it as like shallow, it's kind of insulting to comic book fans. I'm being one myself. So, I see his point, but I didn't really agree with him on that. Next was it wasn't really an article, but it was a little at the end of chapter 6. It was a little guide. It was 7 steps to the perfect story from the Content Marketing Association. And these were: understand your story, choose your plot, choose your hero protagonist, choose your characters, observe the rule of threes, observe your media, and lastly, the rule 7 was the golden rule, which is show, don't tell. Which, when you're writing any kind of story, but be it a book or a film, you always want to show and not tell. It's makes it more engaging for your audience. Next was the rhetorical act reading, which this week's was chapter 6, which is the resources of organization. This was all about how organization is a vital part of rhetoric. It has a huge say in whether or not your argument is effective, because a good argument can be ruined by poor organization, and a bad or untruthful argument can be made very, very believable using good organization if it's presented in a convincing and kind of flashy manner that grabs your attention. Think of like propaganda. And so the thesis is the main idea of your rhetoric. It's the main point that you're trying to get across, and you use your thesis to outline the rest of your speech or essay. The article then went on to talk about the 3 forms of organization that you can use to develop your thesis throughout your entire argument, your entire speech, writing assignment, whatever the form of the piece of rhetoric is that you're doing. The first one was sequence structure, which organizes an idea to develop over time in a series of numbered stages. And these were chronological, which treats a subject by tracing its development over time; narrative, which treats a subject in story form; and spatial, which treats a subject in a directional pattern. The next was topical structures, which develops a subject in terms of parts or perspectives. The parts method splits a topic into multiple subtopics. It's used to emphasize multiple parts of something, such as different techniques for cooking something, different techniques for, fixing a pipe, what have you. It's used to kind of describe methods. And then there was the perspective aspect of it was with the perspective treats a subject by familiar divisions, meaning that the topic is made relatable for the audience by making them see it from multiple perspectives. For example, this would be the perspective topical structure would be used to explain the 2 perspectives on abortion. You have pro-life and pro-choice. So perspectives is used a lot in politics, or when you're making an argument that has a lot of controversy around it, so you want to explain all the points and be able to see around the argument, like as a sphere, both sides. The last one was logical structures, which show how 2 situations or ideas have some type of relationship with each other. And there was the causal method, which treats a subject by showing a cause and effect relationship between the aspects of it. And then there was the problem-solution relation, which treats a subject in 2 parts, the first showing harm and scope, the second showing remedy. So this is great for policy speeches, for politicians, like someone who would be talking about potential solutions to global warming. They would be like, all right, well, this is the harm that global warming is causing, and then here's what we can do to fix it. Another example would be you could talk about student debt this way. You present the problem, and then you show how you're going to solve it. That's what I found interesting in Week 10 reading. Thank you very much.